Hello and welcome back to another Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review. In today's review, we're going to be venturing back into the time-bending Time War, as I'm going to be taking a look at one of the latest releases to feature Paul McGann as the 8th Doctor in Doctor Who The Time War Volume 5, entitled Cass. This release is available to order now on the Big Finish official website in both physical CD and digital download formats. It can also be purchased as part of a bundle alongside the other Doctor Who Time War releases. So for those of you that are wondering, because I imagine from an outsider who hasn't listened to this series, it will probably be a little bit confusing taking a look at the cover art and the various people who appear within this series, as previously we had the 8th Doctor travelling alongside Bliss as portrayed by Raki Thakra in basically all of the previous 8th Doctor Time War box sets. She has now vanished and we have Alex within the series, played by Sonny McGann, of course the Doctor's grandson, and then we also have the return, or at least the debut, of Emma Campbell-Jones as Cass, who is appearing in Doctor Who before she has even been introduced, because after all, this is the Time War. It's rather exciting to see her return, but also further explore that dynamic with the 8th Doctor before she has even met him. So basically one of the main reasons why the Time War series has occurred like this is because Raki Thakra has become incredibly busy within recent years, meaning she has sadly needed to drop her Big Finish commitments to go on to do other things, but there is still that possibility that she may return in the future. So this time round we have the return of Cass and Alex, and it's kind of a soft reboot of the Time War series, so you don't really need to have listened to the previous box sets in order to listen to this one, but it kind of shows how time-bending and unpredictable the Time War can be. So for those of you that like consistency, it may not be the best thing in the world, but at the same time, it seems like the Time War series is now venturing into a brand new chapter with a little bit of a different direction. So without further ado, let's get into the box set's contents. It certainly feels like quite a while since the previous 8th Doctor Time War box set. I think I'm kind of glad about that. Currently, Big Finish do quite a number of series which operate within the Time War era, and often it can get a bit much. Within the 8th Doctor Time War Volume 5, we see the return of the Doctor's grandson Alex as they travel in space and time together, righting wrongs and avoiding the battlefield of the Time War. As I've already mentioned, it is a shame that Raki Thakra is no longer around as Bliss, as kind of that series has now come to a little bit of a halt, but as I've mentioned, because it is the Time War, it does kind of make sense. It shows how things continuously shift. Hopefully we will see that plotline picked up a little bit in the future, but it does seem to be that Big Finish are now sort of continuing that theme, but in a little bit of a different way. Meanwhile, elsewhere starts off the series, and Tim Foley has the job of reintroducing Cass prior to her actual introduction within the final 8th Doctor adventure, The Night of the Doctor. How incredibly timey-wimey. I'm a big fan of Tim Foley's writing, so I was really happy to see his writing credit introducing the set. Emma Campbell-Jones is brilliant from scene 1 onwards. She almost feels like she's playing a companion before the Doctor is even on the scene. As a listener, I really appreciated her contribution to the story, her intelligence and her ability to get involved, and her open mind to complex time-bending concepts, which, let's face it, is something that is incredibly needed within the Time War. It's clear that she likes a good adventure and has hope for her future and her life moving forward, and dare I say it, perhaps she's also quite attracted to the Doctor as well. So there is basically a ship that is travelling in space, but the captain is having rather unusual hallucinations. It's soon clear that portals have opened throughout the ship, and time is going rather all over the place. I think it's one of those narratives where you don't need to fully understand it in order to enjoy it. The concept of time hopping is used a lot within the Time War series, and I think this story is an effective presentation of that. As an opener, it does feel rather back to basics, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. If anything, it was welcoming to start off the series. There is some intriguing mystery as a diplomat from the Council of the Last believes a dangerous animal has got free. If you want a rough idea of what listening to this story is like, it's one of those episodes where there's a bit of a mysterious force lurking within the narrative itself, and you don't particularly have a foe that the Doctor needs to directly defeat. They're not particularly going up against anyone, they're just going up against the unusual events within the Time War, and the way that kind of time can fold in on itself. So you have characters that already know each other before they've even been introduced, and then you have scenes kind of hopping all over the place, and due to the Doctor and Alex kind of travelling into the situation, perhaps there's also that suggestion that they know more than they're initially letting on. It's very unusual for me listening to an 8th Doctor and Alex story. Perhaps my listening experience of this set will be different to others, as I haven't listened to Alex's previous stories. All I do know is that he isn't meant to be around anymore, but now is, somehow. I do like his relationship with the Doctor, and there is that element of closeness which is different to the regular companion relationship. It's also nice hearing McGann travel with a male, which is quite rare, especially in the episodes that I've listened to. Sonny McGann gives a rather laddish performance, I think, an earthly teenager who has confidence and the power to travel in time with his granddad, which feels very unusual saying that, so it's definitely something I'm going to need to get used to when listening to this series. But one thing definitely taking forward in the next Time War box sets, I do want to see more from Alex. I want to explore his relationship with the Doctor, but also generally the things that he's got up to within his life when the Doctor has not been present, because I feel like he's been reintroduced, but for me as a listener who's not listened to those previous stories, I don't feel like I know much about him as a person other than he likes a good adventure and he has a number of the Doctor's qualities. I want to investigate more. Perhaps that is something where I need to go back and listen to his previous stories more than anything, but hopefully there is that purpose. He's returned for a reason, so I'm hoping that we get to see why in the future. Meanwhile, Elsewhere does a great job of setting up this very different TARDIS team dynamic. It's a time-jumpy plot, but for me the big selling point was Cass, so I look forward to hearing more from her in the future. One thing that I'm starting to see from this box set already is that we're starting to venture into a slightly more adventurous and positive interpretation of the Time War as opposed to bleak and depressing. Hudson Sage is an explorer, and his ship along with his crew vanished a long time ago. But the Time War being the Time War, things change. The second episode of the set is The Vespertine, as written by Lou Morgan. Considering the overall Time War context, I do always like when the series does something a little different. It separates from the many Dalek stories and instead focuses on the many aftershocks of the Time War, albeit if that's shocks in the past, present or future. Cass lands on her first new world a part of the TARDIS team, and much like the story's main new character, Hudson Sage, the episode does feel very much like the TARDIS team are on a mission to figure out what's going wrong with time and how the lost ship has been uncovered after all these years. The Doctor is rather on edge as he knows something isn't quite right, and Alex is considerably cautious, trying to ease Cass into space and time adventures gradually, whilst Cass is truly embracing the adventure lifestyle. Within these stories, it really draws attention to the Doctor and Alex being rather careful with Cass. However, she keeps on reminding them that she's been born of many brothers, she's used to being adventurous, she's used to doing dangerous things, so they're kind of reeling her in whilst she's fully exploring, which I think is quite fun. The end of the story does perhaps test Cass a little bit as she realises the adventure isn't all exciting and fun. However, I do still think that she has hope in the universe. In other words, I think that Cass desperately needs a really depressing, bleak story to kind of show her the grimness of the Time War, because she does seem to be rather happy for this genre of Doctor Who, which does feel rather unusual. If anything, I would dare say the entirety of this box set has a more positive tint compared to some of the previous Time War adventures that we've seen, which I suppose it may be a good thing for some fans. I'm definitely sensing a little bit more excitement within Paul McGann's performance. Perhaps he's been given a new lease of life due to the friends that he is surrounded by, which makes him a little bit happier compared to how we've seen him previously. Simon Shepherd does a great job as Hudson Sage, a man who claims to know the Doctor, and yet the Doctor believes they've never met. There is something about his performance which does feel really lonely as he clings on to the memories of the past. I love how Cass also grew up with bedtime stories of Hudson's adventures. It makes the story rather personal to herself, but also her memories of sharing time with her father, which is a rather nice inclusion given how early we are into Cass's adventures within Doctor Who. But that said, at the same time, despite the fact that we are only 2 stories in, I think as a listener I've quite easily accepted Cass as a companion in a really unusual way. There is certainly that impression that Cass and the 8th Doctor were almost meant to be together, and I think that this has been especially impacted by the way that the episodes have been written and performed. Having Alex on board is also really interesting, as he points out to the Doctor that time seems to be a little bit unusual. I think this is definitely an interesting TARDIS team, and they work really well within the audio drama format. And credit where credit is due, before we move on to the final 2-parter of this box set, I like the fact that this series has been divided straight down the middle. We have a Dalek 2-part story, and then we have 2 singular episodes which do things that don't involve Daleks, which really add to the variety of the set, and for me personally as a listener, make this box set a bit more unique compared to the other Time War stories that we've seen in the past. Previously Next Time concludes the 5th volume of the Time War series, as written by James Moran. It's a time-bending 2-parter seeing the TARDIS land on an uninhabitable planet to find habitation. Time is clearly going a little bit wrong, with the TARDIS shutting down and the Doctor feeling like he is missing something from his life. It's soon discovered that the Daleks are building a device which shall allow them to win, not just the Time War, but everything that's ever happened. I love the general idea of this story, that basically an entire civilization has been born out of an accident, and said civilization is actually a really peaceful, happy species, proving that even the bad things that happen within the Time War can somehow create some good, but naturally due to this being a Time War story, sadly the good things don't stick around for long. The core of the story sees the TARDIS team discovered at the aftermath of an explosion of a sacred monument, where all 3 must explain themselves to the local authorities. But this society isn't as advanced, and everything the TARDIS team says sounds absolutely absurd. I think it's clear James Moran rather enjoyed writing this 2-parter. It's packed with lots of witty lines, fun moments, but also a rather justified threat. It's actually rather spooky to me once again how well this TARDIS team have gelled together in the course of only a few stories. Alex pokes fun at the Doctor, and both of the characters seem to enjoy having each other around, and Cass is excellent to listen to. She's still a little bit uncertain at this stage with her travels in time, so everything feels new to her, but she really embraces that, embracing the unknown. If anything, I dare say Previously Next Time almost feels too positive and happy. I don't feel like I'm used to a TARDIS team within the Time War actually enjoying themselves and enjoying the adventure that they are on. It kind of feels like within previous series that the Doctor has just landed these people into a grim situation and they must go to the end of whatever mission that they are on and try and get out alive. Within this story, James Moran allows time to have a bit of comedy with witty one-liners in there as well, which really adds to the enjoyable listening experience. With the inclusion of Cass and the fact that Alex is back, perhaps we can assume we are nearing the end of the 8th Doctor's life, and this is time giving him one last treat before it all goes very depressing and he turns into the War Doctor. I think definitely at this point within the series I am imagining that maybe this is within the later half of the 8th Doctor's life. To me that just makes sense, although I think out of all of the Doctors, the 8th Doctor's chronology is one that is a bit all over the place. I really enjoyed listening to the interrogation scenes with Cass. Mainly she describes the events which led up to these rather unusual circumstances. Again, when the Doctor is being interrogated, he just makes things difficult, but in a fun way, which places the interrogators into a rather difficult situation, as although frustrated about the destruction of their sacred monument, I think they kind of enjoy the presence of this weird collective of travellers. Despite returning, I'd say that the Daleks don't really appear within the story as a main focus, which I don't mind. In fact, I think that this makes the story more interesting, allowing the writing for them to be really sharp and threatening when they are actually present. It's a good example of less being more. The insights we get into the Dalek story itself of the Doctor's friends infiltrating the ship feels very action-packed and complements the interrogation scenes well. Overall, as a part 1 to a 2-part story, it most certainly sets the scene and builds up well to a nice finale. The second part of Previously Next Time continues to explore the implications of the Time War, how time can swap and change, how people can exist and then not, and how the Doctor, being a Time Lord, holds on to memories of the past and future, needing to navigate chronologically in a universe that I suppose for him feels like it actually has no chronology in the first place. Again, I really do like the way that James Moran has incorporated time into the story itself. It feels quite original whilst also avoiding the usual horrible technobabble. It falls back on the simple fact that the events of the story are within a loop and it has almost created itself. The inhabitants of the planet also attach a personality to the events of the episode, but also the implications of the Time War, a whole civilization essentially created out of nowhere, which I found really intriguing. Special mention to Ian Conningham and Nadia Albina, who play the interrogators throughout both parts within this story. I love how they must cope with the Doctor and his friends throughout, their absurd stories, and the seemingly endless flow of problems which arise from their arrival. I think Ashina and Cade really add something to the story, Ashina being rather stern and smart, whilst Cade is very kind with an honest heart. This series has also showcased how well Alex and Cass work together. They are often left to their own devices whilst the Doctor takes on his own roles. McGann puts in a great performance. Particular highlights include his pointless jokes to the Daleks within the later half of the story, which again is very fun to listen to but also quite entertaining, seeing how the Doctor interacts with ultimately these enemies that just can't even comprehend the concept of a joke. As mentioned earlier, I do hope that within the next volume it perhaps gives Alex a little bit more to do. Perhaps a closer focus on his and the Doctor's relationship would enhance the listening experience. But it certainly left me with hope and a little bit of intrigue as to what's going to happen next within the upcoming volumes. I think the same can also be said for Emma Campbell-Jones. She's clearly very happy to be back in the role as Cass, and that excitement is really evoked through the performance. This whole box set I think works as an intriguing insight into the drama of the Time War. It definitely leaves questions for the following sets, and it does certainly feel like a plan is starting to emerge, although the listener is perhaps left in mystery as to what that plan could be. So there we go, that is my review of Doctor Who The 8th Doctor Adventures, The Time War Volume 5, entitled Cass. I really hope you have enjoyed it. Overall for this set, I think it's a nice collection of rather fun and possibly light-hearted Time War stories, of ultimately that darker undercurrent of death and mystery due to the events of the Time War and the way that things change. There's lots of time fluctuation throughout this series and lots of unknown, but I think it's certainly a more light-hearted, positive take on the Time War compared to previous series. But as always with the Time War box sets, I think it is completely down to your own personal preference. I know that some people aren't particularly a fan of the Time War setting, and it's something that may be overdone at times. I do certainly think that there is a lot of Big Finish content out there at the minute that is set within the Time War itself, so I do continuously look for those more experimental and exciting stories. So as a set of adventures, it is quite a lot of fun, although admittedly it will not be for everybody. So thank you very much for watching this review. I really hope you have enjoyed it. Do of course stay tuned on The Host Productions for regular audio drama reviews. Have a nice day, I shall see you all next time.